Hello, I'm Ken Hampshire, the product formulator for Centratech Corporation in Denver, Colorado. I'm speaking to you today from my home office about an incredibly important topic, type 2 diabetes and the myths surrounding it. I've spent the last 11 years researching diabetes, what it is, what it isn't, and what can be done to reverse its symptoms. Over that same time, we've also developed an incredibly effective dietary supplement for normalizing blood glucose. You see a picture of it in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, and on either side are two booklets. The one on the left summarizes the results of a clinical we conducted in 2007. This was a human clinical, a 100-person, placebo-controlled, fully randomized, double-blind clinical. We analyzed the effectiveness of Centra 5 with A1C, fasting blood glucose, blood cholesterol, triglycerides, and blood pressure. The results were incredibly profound and positive. To the right of the Centra 5 bottle, you'll see another booklet. This is a summary of a study we completed in just last year, analyzing and comparing the effectiveness of Centra 5 with the three leading medications for type 2 diabetes in the U.S., notably metformin, Actos, and Byetta. After reviewing and comparing 27 different biological markers, it was determined that Centra 5 is a superior intervention for relieving the symptoms of type 2 diabetes. You can read the full reports of both of these clinicals at our website, and you'll find that in the lower left-hand corner of this slide. Diabetes has been called the scourge of the 21st century, and for good reason. Let's take a look why. DLife just published an article last week that said that if the present rate of growth of diabetes continues at the rate it is right now, by the end of this century, literally everyone on the face of the planet will have diabetes or prediabetes. Think of that. Frightening statistic. DLife is an organization that works with diabetics and educates diabetics all over the country. I want you to think about something. The U.S. population is about 310 million people. Okay? We have almost 26 million diagnosed diabetics, and we have about 79 million people with prediabetes. Add those together equals roughly 105 million people. All right. Now, if we take away from the 310 million total population, everybody under the age of 20, that's another 87 million. So that leaves 223 million people in this country over the age of 20. If we compare that to the 105 million we had when we added up these two numbers, that means that roughly 47% of all Americans over the age of 20 either have diabetes or are pre-diabetic. Think of that. The next time you walk down the street, you see a person over the age of 20. Every other one of them is experiencing bodily damage because of the diabetes they either know about or the prediabetes they don't know about. Now, prediabetes is defined as a fasting glucose reading of between 100 and 125. Or on a glucose challenge basis, basically it's a 2-hour glucose reading between 140 and 199 milligrams per deciliter after the standard 75-gram glucose load. So that gives you an idea of the scope of this disorder. It's unbelievable. Slightly more men than women affected with diabetes, and the minorities in our country are especially hard hit. Diabetes is linked to over 230 deaths a year. That's the number 3 cause of death in this country, following only heart disease and cancer. Heart disease is the number 1 cause. The cost of treating diabetes and the direct and indirect costs amounts to over $200 billion. Now keep in mind, these are 2007 statistics, the latest year that we have statistics available. That amount of money would purchase over half of all cars produced in this country annually. Unbelievable. Diabetes, the leading cause of amputations of the lower body and the leading cause of blindness among adults. Diabetes is killing us, roughly every other one of us, right now. How in the world is that happening? Well, I'll tell you how. Myths are being created that work against us. Now, I want you to listen closely to the next 3 slides because they really set up the basis for what I am going to be speaking about for the next 45 minutes. And I want you to ask yourself, do I see myself here? Creating the myth. You ever been told that diabetes is incurable? Or maybe that diabetes is progressive and irreversible. How about you'll have to take drugs for the rest of your life? Or that eventually, no matter what you do, you'll have to take supplemental insulin. Here's how the myth gets reinforced. Despite your best efforts, doing what your doctor tells you, doing what your dietitian tells you, is your blood glucose still going up? Are you gaining weight? How about the tingling and numbness that comes as an early warning sign of diabetes? Are your medication dosages being increased and one added on top of another? You see, you experience things after you do everything you're told, they continue to get worse. So the myth begins to be reinforced in your mind. You begin to feel that there is nothing you can do, that diabetes is irreversible. You begin to believe what you've been told. Here, the myth becomes fact. Do you feel that regardless of what you do, nothing improves your diabetes? And does that then leave you feeling out of control? You feel there's no hope. I've had the chance to work with thousands of diabetics over the last 10 or 11 years. And I can tell you the one phrase that describes them better than any other is this right here: 50 fat and defeated. 50 fat and defeated. Why? Why does that occur? It occurs because people have allowed the diabetes myth, or a series of them, to take over their lives. Now there's not a lot we can do about the 50 part, but there's a lot we can do about the fat and defeated part. People are trying to do what's right, they're listening to their doctors, but they need an alternative. So they go to the internet, they search the internet, and then they find somebody like me, and I get a phone call. I had a phone call from a gal in Wisconsin a couple months ago. 48 years old, 3 kids, about 45 pounds overweight. She was almost in tears as she relayed her story to me. She said, "Ken, I've done everything I'm supposed to do. I've done exactly what my doctor says, and everything seems to be getting worse." She was using 1,200 milligrams of metformin a day and 120 units of insulin a day. That's a lot of supplemental insulin. And she said, "Nothing's working. I've got no hope. I just feel totally defeated." She didn't know the way out. So we talked for about 45 minutes about many of the things we're going to be talking about over the next little while. And we hung up the phone. That was on a Thursday afternoon. That next Monday, she called me again, except I could hardly recognize her voice because she was so giddy with excitement. And she said, "Ken, when I talked to you last week, you told me things I'd never heard before. Frankly, I didn't know whether you really knew what you were talking about or whether you were some kind of a nut job. But I decided to give it a try." And she said, "I haven't had any supplemental insulin for 3 days. My metformin, I was using 1,200 milligrams. I had 200 milligrams yesterday, and my fasting glucose reading this morning was 105. She was so excited she couldn't hardly speak. So this is what I want to bring some of this information to you, not only to tell you how to make this possible, but I'm going to tell you what's happened, why it's happened, and how we can turn it around. Okay, let's go find some myths to kill. Diabetes is not a disease. That's the first one I want you to hear and hear well. Diabetes is not a disease. You're saying to yourself instantly, "What? Of course it's a disease. Everyone knows it's a disease." Well, I'm here to tell you, if you allow yourself to believe that diabetes is a disease, you have lost much of the battle against diabetes. The reason that's true is because diabetes doesn't just happen to you. You see, a real disease just happens to us. We have no say in the matter. We all know what diseases are. Look, typhus, smallpox, measles, mumps, these are real diseases. A real disease is when a microbe enters our body. It causes a set of symptoms that we label then a particular disease, and we have no control over that. But diabetes doesn't happen that way. Diabetes didn't just happen to you. You didn't walk down the street last week and pick up diabetes from somebody, you see? There's a huge difference here. I call diabetes a fake disease. You've been told it's a disease, and that is a very dangerous concept if you allow yourself to believe it. Because if you do, then you remove the most important ally in your battle against diabetes that you could possibly have, and that's yourself. Diabetes is almost 100% man-made. There's very little genetic component to this. I can hear some of my detractors screaming at me right now, but I'm going to tell you something. Diabetes is almost 100% man-made. There's a small genetic component. We have a few other variables that play, but those account for a very small piece of this. The incidence of diabetes is up 700% in the last 50 years. Genetics don't change anything that fast. Genetics cannot be an excuse. Diabetes is almost 100% man-made. That means it can be unmade. And I know a lot of medical professionals and some of my detractors are going to say, look, you're adding to the burdens that diabetes are carrying. And a lot of medical professionals try to take you off the hook for your diabetes. They say, look, there's enough for you to handle as it is. Well, would you rather have somebody sugarcoat reality with you when your life's at stake? Or would you rather know the truth? Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm here to put you back on the hook. Diabetes is usually reversible. Once we get these concepts through our head and we learn to take responsibility over a disorder, which is largely of our doing, then things can really begin to change. But I want you to understand, Americans are so gullible. We turn over our health into the hands of our doctors and medical professionals. We turn over the education of our children into the hands of the state, the care of our elderly parents into the hands of the state. Heavens, even our own spiritual welfare we turn over many times into the hands of priests, rabbis, and ministers. And my point to you is simply this. You have got to begin using your own eyes and ears and your common logic and thought processes to figure this out and take responsibility. Look, this is not rocket science. These are very simple concepts that get clouded because you've been led to believe a series of myths. And when they compound one upon the other, it leaves you in a place where you feel that there's very little you can do. You're left out of control. So, if that's the condition, why do anything, since nothing you do is going to make any difference? Okay? I want you to know that diabetes is largely your own responsibility. You alone are largely its author and its finisher. So, is it starting to make any sense? Maybe it's time to change some things, maybe next week, next month? No, can't wait that long. Diabetes is much more serious than you've probably been told. I liken it to a runaway freight train. Every day that this disorder continues, the freight train goes faster and faster. And look, we all know what the diabetic freight train looks like. We know where it starts, we know where it goes, and we know how it ends up. It crashes and burns, and it happens to hundreds of thousands of diabetics in this country every year. It happens the same way almost every time. Here's some of the pictures over here that diabetes leads to. This is just in stage 4 diabetes. Diabetic neuropathy leading to injuries and infections of the feet and extremities. Here's where the numbness and tingling and the neuropathy begins to set in most people. And then some of the end results here with the loss of toes and feet, amputations. It's not a pretty picture.